So a lot is happening in the country. Ishongwa targets firms granted tax waiver. Tax wars escalate as the MP orders the Treasury for records. The whole issue of estate duty tax. Does it exist? Which estate are we talking about? Are we talking about Nairobi estates? Pangani? What tax? What exactly does it mean? This is what we want to have a discussion over. And mostly just to learn and understand taxation and the various tax laws in the country. Joining us is James Karanja. He's a tax director at Anjarwala and Kana law firm. We welcome him with the day's proverb. This one is from Malawi. Gold is a debt you can repay, but kindness not till your dying day. Gold is a debt you can repay, but kindness not till your dying day. Our guest host this morning is Sophia Wanuna, and she was like, this one is a very easy and direct proverb. James, good morning.
Good morning. It's good to be here, Eric, Nduko, and Sophia.
Good to have you again. Karibu sana.
Awesome.
She's Ndu Oko, but we like Nduko. This proverb from Malawi.
Right.
What do you make of it? Gold is a debt you can repay, but kindness not till your dying day.
Well, it just says, I think it speaks to the value of what it means. Kindness. This is the values, real values that we have that you cannot put a price to. So gold you can repay, but kindness, just like all moral intrinsic values that we have, things we really ought to cherish beyond anything that money can buy.
It's the same thing Sophia had said.
In essence.
It's the same thing. Speak the same language.
Awesome.
James, you are an expert on tax matters, on international tax, on local tax. You've worked for the Kenya Revenue Authority previously. You've worked for the OECD, the Organization for Economic
Cooperation and Development.
Yeah. And this is the other framework that then works with the OECD countries, right? You are currently a tax director at one of the big law firms in this country. So tax, you and tax, same was up. The rest of us don't get it.
All right.
Let's start with this whole issue of estate duty tax. What does it mean? And right off the bat, is that law still in existence in this country? And does it exempt anybody?
Okay. Well, thank you for having me, Eric, and for the team here. I think first, just to make the point clear, we see there's a lot of political heat going on right now about tax. And just to make it clear that Anjarwala and Kana, a great firm I work for, great African law firm, is apolitical. We cherish or pride ourselves in being a great African firm with a network across 16 African countries. And so we are apolitical, but it is really important for us, I think, to have this debate about what taxation and what does this mean for us. I think as a young democracy, we see the need for us, yes, to continue to have thriving debates and no more important debate than the one on taxation. So I think if we can get the public talking on these issues, I think this is really exciting. So estate tax was a tax that's not just Kenyan, but this is something that's globally the view about inheritance tax, that anytime money is passing from one generation to another, that there is an amount of tax that is paid because you've received money that was not yours in the first place. So think about it. When you receive an income from your employer, some government wants to collect some tax. When you receive your pension, say at the end of your time here at KTN and the Standard Group, government then will collect some amount as it crosses over to you. So estate tax was just one of those taxes that exists, which is focused on inheritance. Does it exist currently? We know that the act was abolished. I think we're all very clear on that, and that it no longer applies.
At all?
No longer applies at all.
Okay.
This is not a tax that is, you are only taxed according to law. And Nduoko, if you do not have a tax law that says your income should be taxed in this way or that way, then that ceases to be something that can be brought sort of into the scope. Yes.
So with the way things currently stand, is there a tax law? What does it say? And then who then is guided by it in Kenya today?
There is a tax law, and that tax law is in several statutes. You have the Income Tax Act, you have the Customs, the East African Community Customs Management Act, you have the VAT Act, you have the Excise Act, the Stamp Duty Act. So there's several acts that all seek to bring some element of revenue into being, and only according to that law can your income or can your transaction...
Can your money be taxed?
Can be collected. Yes.
So there is no estate duty tax?
Yeah, so we are all clear.
No, we are not. That's why we are asking.
Because the thing, you have a member of parliament
right.
moving and writing to the clerk of the Senate, proposing to have Section 7, subsection 3 of the Estate Duty Act, which apparently exempts the 2 former first families from paying taxes, deleted.
Right.
So from where you sit, this is...
Yeah, I think without going, I think if we stick to the facts,
okay,
it does not exist.
The act was abolished, and I think it is clear if we, it is important now. And I noticed there was also another member of the House who then goes ahead to say that they're actually not looking to reintroduce it. So there is an implicit acknowledgement that act is not in place. But what I'd really want us to have a discussion around today is now is the time, I think, as a country, as a people, when the government is talking about the need to mobilize tax, to expand, to broaden our tax base, to put all these things on the table and say, which of these taxes should apply. Is this time for us to relook at this? Is this a viable tax? Is this a viable opportunity? Are our taxes progressive or regressive? Often the idea of an inheritance tax tends to hit on, obviously, the people, those who are men of straw have very little to pass on to their children, but it is the question of the bigger the richer families, and when they pass that down to their children, that then this becomes an issue. So I think if we have a broader discussion, which is what I hope we will do today, to say, look, what can we do? We all acknowledge the country's in a lot of debt. We all acknowledge there's huge demands for revenue. So I'd really, if we could focus on what are some of those things that we could do to generate revenue for the country.
Okay. So then that second bit, we are actually discussing that, balancing the politics versus the reality of things. The second bit, if we are clear now, according to you, that this law, the tax law, the estate duty tax was actually abolished a long time ago, and therefore it hasn't even been applying for a while.
Correct.
Are there avenues through which some people do not pay tax legally?
Correct. And to talk a little bit even about the history of that act and the reality, our common law reality, is that the law would exempt the sovereign, meaning, so in the English law, the queen or the king was not expected to pay tax. When the Bible, Jesus says, pay unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. So the question is,
was
who
Caesar
is
paying?
Yes, was Caesar whose face was on the coin? So if Caesar's face is on the coin, so the idea that he would be putting money to himself. So this thing sort of carried through into the common law, and so the sovereign, the queen, was exempted generally from any payment of tax, and this is still a reality today. In a lot of our statutes. The East African Community Management Act says, goods coming in for the president should not be taxed. The Income Tax Act says his emoluments, his salary, his allowances, should not be taxed.
Sitting president.
The sitting president. This is the Constitution. This is within the Income Tax Act. So you have various acts. The VAT Act now does not recognize. In the past, it did have such a recognition, not anymore. And I've seen the discussion going on with proposals, even recommendations being made that maybe a lot of these exemptions need to go away, a lot of these waivers, so that we think broader on how we can mobilize revenue. And this is a discussion I think we should have today. The question of tax expenditures, a tax incentive, a tax exemption, all these things are offered in the statute for a purpose. That one on the sovereign, I've told you that yes, the law does make exemptions for certain people. You and I get a relief every year, whether it's for insurance or for personal relief. And then you have even our members of parliament. There's an act there that says, their allowances should not be taxed. So if we're going to have a conversation around what needs to be brought into tax, I think it's really important for us not just to let the politicians do this alone, but I think tax professionals, a lot of broader public engagement needs to take place about where do we need to go. And right now, Eric, this is a great opportunity because currently government is looking at the national tax policy, and this policy talks through all the different acts. What should happen? What do we want? Do we want just a source-based system or a resident system? Should I just be taxed on my Kenyan income, on my global income? What should our laws say about who is entitled to an incentive, who is not? Because an incentive in itself is a way when government forgoes collecting revenue from you, they're doing it so that they assist you to do certain things. They will give you a relief because, say, for instance, you are taking out insurance because that is encouraging savings. If they give you a certain incentive because you have put up a factory and that factory is going to create jobs, so a tax expenditure should not be looked at in a void. These expenditures are there for a purpose. They're there that the tax law should motivate certain behavior, whether positive, in the case of incentives, or like an excise duty, which is there to say, look, could you smoke less? Or if you smoke, or you drink, there are other sort of costs, social costs.
To discourage you from.
Exactly. Or to, in the process, that some of the money they will collect from that will also help them to put back to address some of the externalities that are caused by these behaviors.
Can we take a couple steps back here? Sure. I mean, the assumption is that we all understand the reasons as to why a government would levy tax upon individuals or businesses. What was the original intent of tax? And even as we see this then, practiced through difference. So there's individual taxes, how much you pay on your income. There's businesses, how much you must pay then in order for the business to run. And then on the money that you make, you're paying some to the government. What was the original intention of taxes levied then on individuals and businesses?
Yeah, so the history of taxation, I think, goes back to a time when we all recognize we have to have leadership. You have a monarch, or you have the village head, whoever. And there's the idea that leadership or to operate as a state, you must then be able to provide public goods. In that case, when tax first came in, it was countries needed to go to war. A government perhaps or a leader might say, look, as a government, maybe they're going to put money. They're going to create business through which they make money. But for most governments, think about it, the only real source of money to do anything, to pay their salaries, to provide security, to provide infrastructure, is this one source. So government must continually always think about what it is they can do to maximize revenue, because even if they say they start to borrow, where are you going to pay that money from? So the big push, of which I was part of as a career employee back then, was to think about the idea of economic sovereignty. you are not a country, you are not stable if you do not have your own source of revenue. If you sit back as a country and all you do is wait for donor money, the reality, that donor money is taxpayers' money from another jurisdiction, which will come with its own agenda. So for us to be kujitegemea is the idea that as a nation, we must be proud that we are able to contribute towards the coffers for our own good.
And the thing what has been interesting is, in terms of from where you sit, that you have those informal employment, that they are the ones that bear the brunt, carrying the heavy load in as far as taxation is concerned. And yet the vast majority are in the informal sector. When a government then is intent and keen on raising this revenue, but there's the debate that let the wealthy pay more, they have the money. But can that cover for this other vast majority? And how does it then, as an administration, perhaps would it reconcile itself to still get from those that are not covered in tax collection?
Yeah, you raise an interesting point, Sophia, that we have a big push between those who are in formal sector, who seem to be like a very easy target. You and I sitting collecting a salary, it seems like the easiest way to go. There is the other side, obviously, of indirect taxation, which is every time we buy a loaf of bread, we buy a soda, we buy milk, we go into the petrol station, is that we are constantly getting taxed. So it is actually a very, very broad discussion around government looking at multiple sources. And the big thing here, I think, is the burden. Is the burden being shared fairly? Is the burden being shared fairly? When you think about it, you and I will pay the same amount that the amount of tax, say VAT, excise, on a commodity like bread, like milk, like sugar. You're going to pay the same amount of tax that the person who is earning 5,000 is paying. You're paying the exact same amount of tax. Now, that's a scenario where clearly that is regressive. It means a lot of the people who are the lower income bracket spend a lot more of their money as a percentage on taxation than those who are wealthier. So a progressive tax system would say, for instance, that those who are running 10 million, 20 million should be paying a significantly higher proportion of tax than those who are earning 300,000, 100,000. But the reality now, as our tax policy is currently, or our tax law, is that the top tax bracket hits people who are earning very low incomes. From as low as about 30, 40,000 shillings, you're already at the top tax bracket. Now, I lived in France where at a certain, seeing what the law there was, that past a certain portion of income, you actually had a very high top tax bracket of about 45%. Now, that means if you've crossed sort of some threshold, why should we not be saying that those who are wealthy should then be bearing also a bigger portion? Now, the wealth tax is one of those areas where this is dealt with, maybe some excess tax for people like those. A death tax or the estate tax was meant to sort of balance back that as you transfer money from wealthy people, that at least there is some redistribution. So there are real questions or discussion we must have as a country as to how we rebalance our tax so that the wealthier people who seem to be managing their tax affairs in a way that they pay less, would be brought into the tax net and also pay their fair share in equitable terms, not in like equal terms.
Do you feel that there's an and just look, talking about the different things that you've segmented into today, looking at Kenya today, and I can hear all the backing right now at the moment, which, okay, let's put that aside for a moment. I know what I think, and many have said, but do you think that there is an overburden that has been put on the responsibility of this tax for the development of the nation? From where you sit, is it possible to develop a nation from this myriad of taxes that we see being levied?
We have no choice, Nduoko. We have no choice. Government must continue to look at ways to tax, must look at where there are tax leakages, must think carefully about where, which sector of the economy is bound to be affected. Obviously, you want to be careful that you don't tax people out of existence. You don't want to tax business to the point where it makes no sense to continue to make those efforts. So we must recognize effort, we must encourage effort, but there is just no other way for government to move, to pay its debts, to pay its workers without this tax. So I think...
But it's not worked. Let's be honest. That it has not worked. That this heavy taxation that we see cannot be given the sole responsibility for Kenya having come from point A to point B. There are certain things that have been done. Salaries have been paid, but in terms of development index and the notches that Kenya has attained, can we say that the funding that has come from taxes is responsible for that development? And many would argue that if you're going to be, you have to make.
Yes.
If you're going to develop, you must produce your own.
Exactly.
So it's not going to come from taxes.
Yes. No, you raise a very valid point. First, just get this clear, even just for me as a career taxman, I think to be hitting a 3 trillion budget as a country, it's just staggering. It's to think where we were 10, 20 years ago. So that in itself is significant. And let's give credit where it's due. This is an economy that's been extremely resilient, and that on the back of businesses who clearly have to be the ones that generate commerce through which a tax administration then collects resources. So hats off to the working public. Hats off to all of us who make that effort every day to grow our economy, to trade, to export, whether it's goods or services. So clearly the people and what they do are the backbone of the fact that then a tax administration comes on the back of that, will collect revenue. But I want to say something else, and this question is so important. There is a completely different side of this that we need to be conscious of. And this is when we talk about domestic resource mobilization, we need to be aware as a country that there are several other sources of money that are coming in. And one really, really exciting source now is private equity. Global private equity is a huge, huge market. If you see now your huge malls, if you see your art cafes, your Javas, this big local multinational enterprises, hospitals, large hospitals that are now coming up through funding that is not from the state coffers, but from private equity that is looking in to build for opportunities to grow their investments, and that money is actually coming in, and it is causing our economy to also thrive. We know our diaspora is a huge source of the money that is also coming in. So it's a complex discussion, I think, Nduoko, to say that tax is the only source, I think would be cutting it short. But we really still must focus on, now that this discussion is on, this debate is on, as a public, let us also have this discussion to say, hey, wait, can we look at some of the areas where tax has been leaking? Have we been adopting or our incentives, our waiver regime appropriately, and where should it be directed? Because tax is also a way to motivate behavior, whether positively or negatively. The state says if you build out of Nairobi, if you build in certain municipalities, you pay less tax. If you put your company in the stock exchange, we'll give you less. It is really, for government, this is their tool to move people towards a certain direction.
But then the question that Ndu is asking, all this money that the few people are paying heavily for, is it justified? And can we say that this is the way to go? This is because the conversation now and all the signals are that the taxes that we're paying currently are going to be increased in one way or another. There's a new tax that's going to be introduced here and there, and not widening the tax base, but still targeting those that are informal sectors.
And to add to that, Eric, is that the elephant still in the room is that, yes, figure out where the tax leakage is, where are you losing all of this revenue that could be coming into this, bucket. But if it has all of these holes down, it doesn't matter how much water we keep pouring, everyone is bringing in, for as long as there's also not a clear strategy and focus on how some of these public funds are being looted, who are these people stealing all of this money, then we can collect as much as we want, but we keep losing it, and then where does that leave us as a people?
Yeah, so two sides to this. One is on the revenue generation, two is on the utilization. So I think first to take us first to how we generate the funds, all I think I'd really like to put before our listening audience today is that I think as a country, with professionals in some of the tax professionals in some of the leading global institutions, we have Kenyans in the IMF, we have Kenyans in the OECD, like I was among the first Africans to be there. We have Kenyans in the UN, and there's a running joke out there that, do you have your Kenyan, in Geneva, and it's we have great intellectual capacity, which if as a country we're going to say, please, we're going to put our leading minds to think through carefully our policy, a tax policy, so that it is one that meets the needs of a 21st century, a growing economy, an emerging economy that needs to create opportunities for vast population. Think about all the big four. You need housing, you need a manufacturing sector to grow. All these things, one has to, I think, put tax professionals in the discussion, leading the discussion around where we should go. Now, on the expenditure side, clearly, huge leakages everywhere. And I was with judges in a recent forum where they were pointing out there's about 400 billion locked in the court system, disputes that are just unresolved. Now, is this something, that government says, look, we are creating a special court, we are creating a system for faster resolution of this dispute so that people determine what it is they can pay. And so we hear clearly some positive sounds to say, could taxpayers negotiate? But yes, we need to unlock all these disputes, because why? Even for companies or people who are doing business, they are not served by the fact that they have a dispute in their books for the last 10 years that goes unresolved. So we need to think carefully. Corruption, obviously, those are the issues perhaps that we may not address in this forum, but to say we need to look at where are some of those gaps. This is one glaring gap. If you have a way to unlock 400 billion, as you look at other ways of doing maybe privatizations and other things that would reduce or cause us to pay our debts and be able to do more public service, then we must think carefully about those leakages. I think we talked earlier, Eric, about on the international tax side, issues about treaties. So, let's explore some of this.
Let's talk about that actually after we come back from the break. Are there people who are making a lot of money here, but then they're able to get away with not paying tax legally?
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Conversation continues with James Karanja, tax expert. He's a tax director at Anjarala and Kana. He's worked with the Kenya Revenue Authority before. He's worked with the Organization for Economic
Cooperation and Development. Those
ones. OECD. It's a multinational. All right. So we're talking about tax, and the conversation, like you're saying, James, is about time that we, all of us as a country, then talk about tax and how tax can be used to incentivize growth, and also that everybody pays an equitable share of tax. Those that are wealthy, that are in privileged positions, should pay more. But in this country, those that are in those privileged positions are actually the ones who have very many ways of getting exemptions. You've told us the political leaders have that. There's this and the other. You cannot tax their allowances. The head of state gets very many tax exemptions on consumption, very many things. And yet we say, kulipa ushuru ni kujitegemea. Hawalipi ushuru na wanatutegemea.
Yeah, I mean, this is like I say, we keep this professional from where I stand, and it really should not be about getting. We need to look at the bigger picture. Take, for instance, within the context of ensuring that there's an equitable share by those who are rich and able to pay more, that we also seal some of those loopholes. I see the government now will be coming up with a new budget measures. I see capital gains is one of those areas that they're saying they look to increase the rate. Clearly, you're going to get a lot of uproar here and there, where people who've been very comfortable in paying less would be called upon to pay more. But I think it's really, really important that we ensure that this is done equitably, that those who've been bearing the bigger brunt of this at the lower end, like I talked about earlier, those we need to safeguard, and then to talk about some of those ways that the richer people are able to pay less. So some of those are structural, like if you are an owner of capital, then you pay less through, if you're more of an investor and what you get is capital gains, you're paying a lesser rate of tax than the rest who are paying, at 30% or more. So these questions are really questions that I'm saying we really need to focus on our tax policy now. Thank you.
Can we draw some parallels here? Because I think we where you're coming from, I can understand, the need to, draw and color within the lines and say, look, this is how it works. However, we cannot run away from the subjective matter of tax. We can't. That it is to be expected that if a nation taxes its people, that there are certain things that the people then expect to see as a result of that tax.
Correct.
So people complain about high taxes, not because the tax is high, but because they do not see the result of these high taxes. There are countries in this world, on this planet, where people are taxed almost 45% of their income. However, their children go to school for free.
Correct.
They can eat food off the tarmac because it is so smooth. They do not have to worry about whether one day the lights will be on or off. They don't have to worry about if there is a pothole on said road, it will be fixed within a matter of time. They don't have to beg, lobby and picket. So this is what we're talking about now. Could it be that we see people evading and avoiding tax here in Kenya because you're not sure what you're getting out of it?
Sure.
In fact, you're almost sure that what you're getting is a negative return. Is it possible?
Yeah, thank you, Nduoko. I think the tax seems to be a really big issue for us, at the heart of the social contract between the people and their leaders. So tax is a way for you to say, hey, wait, you're taxing me and I'm holding you accountable to do certain things. So yes, the social sets, the Nordics have been really good with this, with extremely high tax rate, but everybody, the schooling, the education, the infrastructure is also positive, the hospitals, the medical system.
And if anything should go belly up, they have a sovereign fund where everybody in the country gets a certain amount of, money going to them,
True. So, this is at the heart of the contract, which is why I'm saying the discussion needs to be broadened. Then the public need to ask the questions about how are we getting taxed? And as we're getting taxed, what value are we getting back from the state?
Yeah.
So as we do this, we do our responsibility, and then we ask those questions. So it is really sad when, for instance, the Revenue Authority needs to really be depoliticized. While, like in the US, you see the IRS, depending on which party is in the House, it's defund the IRS or then fund the IRS or, shut down the IRS. You cannot do without this institution that collects revenue. Regardless of which government comes into the House, that institution must stay professional. And I'm privileged and grateful, that I was able to get Kerry to join the Forum on Tax Administration, which is like top leading administrations in the world who come together and share ideas. So they must be cutting edge. They must continue to do their job to collect and to collect responsibly. And then the citizens then have a role to ask that question. Now that you've collected this, how is it being applied? And that's a question of accountability of our leaders, whether those in parliament, and you quack me up a little there, and I don't want to sort of get into that, but sio kutegemewa, it is all of us
tujitegemee.
Sote tujitegemee. I think this is a really an important rallying call for all of us.
If you look at the flip side, and then the question is, why then do you think in these countries, you mentioned the IRS, for example, the majority of folks don't play? You pay your taxes, you pay your taxes. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that they don't even think twice? That, okay, can I get away with it this month? Can I get away with it this year? Why don't they have that conversation?
One, because the revenue body is so strong. I tell you, the sort of enforcement or compliance measures, those you cannot wish away. Your tax administration has to be strong, has to be effective, has to be able to reach the broadest audience of people who are earning an income. That you cannot wish away. But having said that, there is what is called the not tax morality, but tax this positive
allegiance.
Yes, to pay tax. This is something else.
So there's patriotism.
Patriotism. It is.
Can they see the result of their tax? So they say, you know what, these guys are doing something with it, so we might as well pay it.
Yeah, I mean, this is the question. I just remember once a minister in government passed who says, I don't see what tax money does. And so why do we pay? And then you think about it.
And this is a minister.
This is a minister in government. So we must all see what it is that taxes do. We're all driving on these beautiful roads. We have our challenges, true. Many of us maybe would be taking our children to private school because the public school system may not be as effective for everybody, is not enough to take everybody. Our hospitals may not be able to handle everyone. So we really, which goes before which? Do we say we do not pay tax because we do not receive the service, or do we do as we must, ensure that our institutions collect all the money they are supposed to collect, and then we hold our leaders accountable. We are still a really young democracy. We're still a growing nation. And I think as a country, we need to be proud of how much we've achieved through different things that the country is able to do to mobilize for public good. That as a country in the region, people look at Kenya and say, wow, this is a country that they can look up to.
Yeah. And a quick one around, I mean, Kenyans are reeling from the high cost of living, correct, right? Yeah. You have already the cost of electricity is quite high. Right now, EPRA is conducting those public hearings because of Kenya Power saying we need some more money from Kenyans. We're hearing about possible water taxes on the way as well, more expensive. There was some proposal around even taxing money transfers and all that. I wonder from where you sit in as far as a tax policy and what guides an administration, to the extent that you could also keep taxing. Yes, you want to collect all of this revenue, but that they could get to a point of that straw that breaks the camel's back. And I wonder what for you that would be. What must the government be wary of? That yes, you want to collect the money. Yes, you're keen and intent on this, but also how far is too far? Is there a place you can cross without even realizing in this whole campaign of let's everyone pay tax, let's all raise these funds?
Yeah, I mean, so this is the question, I think, at the heart of tax policy, and which is why we're saying professionals, government should really be engaging professionals to think through the entire economic system. You have externalities that are created by taxes that if you put in place, for instance, you increase levies on gas to the point where cooking gas becomes unaffordable. And what you do, you start creating other environmental challenges. People go back to using charcoal. You take maybe the things, the drinks people take, and you overtax those, and people will end up going back to illicit brews, which then are extremely harmful. So yes, a tax policy is not just about saying this is more, or this is the one area we're looking at. I think it's so broad, and a government must be using professional advice, using its economists, its experts to say, where can we, if we collect this tax, what is the effect here? What is the effect here? I think a lot of these things ought to be tested. And the national tax policy, like I said earlier, would be a platform for the country to say, okay, wait, at the heart of our social contract, our tax and how you can tax us, could we agree at least what are these basics, and that you're going to ensure that professionals are also in place that look this through. The Parliamentary Budget Office, is it properly resourced?
Yeah.
Are there people who can look through or do measurements like they do in the US, where they can determine, well, this tax won't really, the impact of it will not really be positive. Can we perhaps look in another direction? So really, really important that we do this professionally.
What I hear, James, and you can correct me, is the bigger conversation in terms of just getting everybody on board and everybody paying taxes is equity. Just making sure that I pay my equitable share of tax, which means that depending on the level I am in the social status, I'm paying that. And I also feel that there is value of what I'm receiving. I think one of the things that people argue about is, why are people going into politics? There are many people who are going into politics because they want to, bring about real change. And there are very many people who are going into politics because it gives them certain privileges. And those privileges are, of course, you get into another higher income bracket and you don't even feel the pinch of the tax that you pay. And you can find ways in which you end up not paying tax. You get into those avenues where you have conversations where you can get exemptions on this and the other. Or you are getting into that level of business where you operate at a level, you influence policy. Kenya signs tax treaties with certain countries, and then these companies are making a lot of money, and instead of that money actually going to a tax authority, that money is exempt for one reason or the other. So when those who are informally employed, or those who are just watching, are seeing the privilege they're getting away with it, they don't have any incentive to come into the tax bracket and pay.
Yeah, so you raise a valid point. So first, this is my tea and bread every day is as a tax practitioner focused on international tax. We advise on transfer pricing and international tax structuring and such things. So yes, let me say that it's really important for businesses to ensure that they are efficient, they are effective, that they are not, when they're operating in many jurisdictions, they are not, double taxed. You do business in all East Africa, and as you do that business, money is being taxed across each of those jurisdictions. But yes, there has been a question of abuse of treaties, for instance, to say this question of the hidden exemption, the side that we all don't see, is that when an income and a treaty is not cannot be taxed here, what you've done, you've effectively changed the local tax law, and on the other side where the income is moving, that income is now not being taxed. So effectively, someone has been able to sort of shift out in a way that is artificial or not done properly, and the country ends up losing. So when I say this is a multifaceted challenge, it's really important that we look through and discuss this. One really important area that I have to laud the Kenya government is on digital service tax. The global discussion going on, well, fine. There's this put in place, this OECD BEPS. But then the reality is, without digital service tax, for instance, without the government itself looking to say we are going to levy transactions, tax on transactions, some of those solutions globally may not give a result, as we've noticed. And that when Kenya stands out and says, no, we are going to tax. And Kenya stands out in Africa, perhaps with Nigeria as the only countries that have stepped back and said, we are going to collect this tax. I think this is something that should be lauded. This is something government should look at even as a greater source or potential source of income, because you are diversifying. You are saying not just the local people, but even those people who are abroad and earning money from us, that they should also be taking their fair share of the tax burden. So I think this is a laudable, commendable effort, and this is an area I think government should continue to exploit.
Okay, this tax pricing. So how does it work? There are some businesses that are doing business in Kenya, earning money from Kenya, and they end up not paying tax in Kenya.
Yeah, so this is transfer pricing is this really interesting area where companies are doing business with each other across the border, and they have an opportunity to decide where to pay their tax. Now, we would do, as Anjarwala and Kana advise you on how to ensure that you comply with the law, that what you are declaring meets the requirement of the law of arm's length principle, that what you are declaring here should be what any independent party should have paid if they were an independent business. So that's the whole essence of transfer pricing. For those who choose to just say, well, they're going to shift money out to some other jurisdiction and to do so artificially, then, those are the sort of things one would frown upon. But ensuring that companies that do business across jurisdictions are paying what they should properly pay is certainly an effort or an endeavor that is worthwhile, and one that we do not shy away from.
All right, James, we thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you for shedding light on tax and tax matters. Let me tell you about something that's happening in Kilifi County,
right? In
Vipingo. You've heard about Vipingo development.
Yes.
By Centum Real Estate, right? So they did the first number of houses, 500 houses. They've handed over those houses to their owners. Are you one of them? Okay, now you can be in the second lot, because they are releasing now the second lot of houses. So you can either take an apartment, or you can take one of the bungalows or maisonettes that they have there. Beautiful. The road from Mombasa to Kilifi is being dualed, so easier. There's an airstrip in Vipingo, easier. There's SGR, and then there's a road that connects all the way from Mariakani going down, easier. Place to go.
Sounds great.
I'll give you more details.
Perfect.
James Karanja is a tax expert, tax director at Anjarwala and Kana Law Firm.